Today we are in chapter 9 of A Literal to Living, and we'll be taking a look at Genesis chapter 13 in its entirety, and we'll be looking at chapter 14, verse 1 through verse 16. And this will all be in the English Standard Version, chapter 13 in its entirety, and then verse 1 through 16 of chapter 14. So as always, before we get started, I'd just like to offer a quick word of prayer. Father, I'm just so thankful for another opportunity to learn more about you through the study of your word. God, I pray for wisdom, clarity, and understanding. It's in Jesus' name that I pray. Amen. So let's jump in. So Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him into the Negeb. Now Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. And he journeyed on from the Negeb as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place where he had made an altar at the first. And there Abram called upon the name of the Lord. And Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, so that the land could not support both of them dwelling together, for their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. At the time, the Canaanites and the Perizzites were dwelling in the land. Then Abram said to Lot, "Let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are kinsmen. Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, then I'll go to the right. Or if you take the right hand, then I'll go to the left." And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, in the direction of Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself all the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east. Thus they separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the valley and moved his tent as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. Now I'll pause here for a moment because I'm curious. So it looks like Abram gave Lot the opportunity to decide where he was going to go first. And I'm just curious, back in chapter 12, we saw that Abram was told, "You and your offspring will be given the land of Canaan." And so Lot chose to go to the Jordan Valley because it was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Jordan, like the land of Egypt. And because he chose to go that way, then Abram settled in the land of Canaan. I wonder if Lot chose to go the other direction because, maybe he knew, hey, God promised this to you. Or did Lot decide to go the way that he went because he saw, it was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord? And just interesting. I have no idea. Crazy though. Now the men of Sodom were wicked and great sinners against the Lord. Starting at verse 14, the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, "Lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward, and eastward and westward. For all the land that you see, I will give to you and to your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if no one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring also can be counted." Okay, let me read that again. "I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if one can count." Okay, yeah, I read that completely wrong the first time. The verse 16, I put a no one in there. Okay, verse 16, "I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring also can be counted. Arise, walk through the length and the breadth of the land, for I will give it to you." So Abram moved his tent and came and settled by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. That is all of chapter 13. Went up from Egypt, him and his wife and all he had, along with Lot, to the Negeb. Abram was very rich in livestock. I'm not going to revisit why I'm a little bit bothered. It's in last week. I'm looking at verse 13. I'm going to just skip over it. I'm coming back. A lot of possessions between them, a lot of people between them, a little strife between the herdsmen. "Let there be no strife between me and you." So they decided to separate. Abram gave him an opportunity to decide where he was going to go. Whichever side you pick, you go there, and then I'll go the other way. After Lot left, Abram went to Canaan, or settled in Canaan. And God said, "This will be your land, you and your offspring forever. And I'll make them as the dust of the earth. They won't be able to be counted." Okay. And once again, He built an altar to the Lord. Interesting. Starting in verse 14. In the days, oh my Lord, there are some names in here. I should have listened to this ahead of time. Woo! In the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Sherdalomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goyim. These kings made war with Bera, king of Sodom, Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, Shemeber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar. All these joined forces in the valley of Siddim, that is the Salt Sea. 12 years they had served Sherdalomer, but in the 13th year they rebelled. In the 14th year, Sherdalomer and the kings who were with him came and defeated Rephaim in the Ashtoreth Karnaim, the Zuzim in Ham, the Emim in the Shaveh Kiriathaim, and the Horites in their hill country of Seir as far as El Paran on the border of the wilderness. Then they turned back and came to En Mishpat, that is Kadesh, and defeated all the country of the Amalekites and also the Amorites who were dwelling in the Hazazon Tamar. Then the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, went out, and they joined battle in the valley of Siddim with Sherdalomer, king of Elam, Tidal king of Goyim, Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar. 4 kings against 5. Now the valley of Siddim was full of bitumen pits, like tar. And as the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some fell into them, and the rest fled to the hill country. So the enemy took all the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their provisions and went their way. They also took Lot, the son of Abram's brother, who was dwelling in Sodom, and his possessions, and went their way. Then one who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew, who was living by the oaks of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and of Aner. These were allies of Abram. When Abram heard that his kinsmen had been taken captive, he led forth his trained men born in his house, 318 of them, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. And he divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants, and defeated them, and pursued them to Hobah, north of Damascus. Then he brought back all the possessions, and also brought back his kinsman Lot with his possessions, and the women and the people. So now what has happened is there's been a fight. There's a bunch of kings' names, and I'm not going to say all of them. For 12 years, looks like this one group of kings served Sherdalomer, but in the 13th year they rebelled. In the 14th year, Sherdalomer and the kings who were with him came and defeated some kings. And then you had 5 kings fight against 4, and they end up taking all the possessions of the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah and end up taking Lot as well. And then Abram came with 318 men born in his house, and they went in pursuit. So Abram was in Canaan. That's where he settled. And they went and found where they were going. They pursued them. Okay, let me see if I got a map here. I will put this on the screen, trying to get an idea of how far this was. Okay, so I can see where it shows him traveling. I'm just trying to get an idea of how far it was. Times 20, it could have been like 160 miles, the amount of distance that Abram traveled to get to where Lot was. It says in chapter 14 that he pursued them as far as Dan. He divided the forces against them by night, he and his servants, and defeated them and pursued them to Hobah, north of Damascus. He brought him back all of the possessions, and also brought back his kinsman Lot with his possessions and the women and all the people. So, I think I have 2 principles here. And one of them isn't really a principle, I think, related to this week. So I'm not going to really spend much time on it. But I think one of the principles, let me look at this here. One of them I feel is going to be from 2 different perspectives, but the same principle. Okay, let me just pause for a second, and I'm going to write some things down, and then I'll see you on the other side of this note-taking. Okay, so I'm not really going to call this first one a principle, but I will say that Abram was given a command in chapter 12, Verse 1. Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, from your country and your kindred and your father's house. He left his country, he left his father's house, but his kindred came with him, his nephew Lot. Now he's gotten to a point where there's some conflict that has occurred. Maybe had he been a little bit more obedient to what God told him, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. One of the great things about God is he's so gracious and he's so merciful that even sometimes when we disobey, he still doesn't, he still sometimes just, is great to us, even when we're disobedient, right? He still allowed great things to occur for Abram, even in disobedience, right? But in this situation, there was conflict that arose. There were things that ended up happening as a result. But maybe if he didn't bring Lot along, then this conflict wouldn't have arisen. They wouldn't have been in conflict to where they had to separate. And if this battle had occurred between these kings, maybe Lot wouldn't have been taken if he had just been obedient, right? So that's what I mentioned about that. But the principle that I see that I want to talk about from two different perspectives is that when conflict arises, choose peace over catastrophe. When conflict arises, choose peace over catastrophe. So there was some civil tension, some domestic dispute between Abram and Lot. Genesis 13, verse 8. Abram said to Lot, there will be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are kinsmen. It talked about how the land couldn't support both of them. There was strife between the herdsmen and the livestock. And he said, let there be no strife between us, right? Abram chose peace over catastrophe. That's what he chose. He chose peace over catastrophe. And there were three ways that ultimately Abram chose peace over catastrophe. And one of them was in showing humility over pride. When you look at, verse 9. So Abram was obviously the uncle, the elder of the group that was traveling here in terms of family line. Lot was his nephew. He was like the, in terms of lineage, like the patriarch, he had priority. So he could have said, listen, we're having some issues and we're going to have to go our own way. Here's what I'm going to do, because I'm the oldest. So I'm going to get first dibs. And then, here's what I'm going to do. And then here's what you're going to do. That's not what he did. In choosing peace over catastrophe, he exhibited humility over pride because he could have done that and he would have been within his right to do that. But what allowed peace was that verse 9 is not the whole land before you. Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, then I will go right. Or if you take the right hand, then I will go left. Then Lot lifted his eyes and saw the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere like the garden. So we see that Lot chose for himself all the Jordan Valley. That's one of the things that Abram did to choose peace over catastrophe. Again, when conflict arises, choose peace over catastrophe. The second thing that he did to choose peace over catastrophe was he chose dialogue over division. And this one right here is huge. Really, these first two are huge for me. After I explain this, I'll talk to you about how this is important for me in my life, right? So again, Abram could have handled this a different way. It didn't have to be a dialogue. It could have been a one-sided conversation. Now, we just read the part that was said here, but he allowed there to be a choice that was made versus just dictating what was going to happen. Let there be no strife between us. Is this not the whole land before us? And then he allowed Lot to decide, right? One of the things with that first one, humility over pride, I've had issues in the past, with me and my kids where I take that back. One thing that I've tried to always make sure that I have done with my kids is, okay, wait a minute. Let me make sure I say this the right way. So there have been times where I have done things the wrong way. And I'm a person who believes in owning up to the things that I've done wrong, right? I'm not too proud to say that I've done things wrong, right? I believe in owning up to the things that I've done wrong. But sometimes it's easy to get into a situation where the way that you may be challenged in a moment, it's hard to feel like to show humility in a moment when you feel like the way you're challenged is inappropriate or incorrect, right? And but being, choosing humility over pride sometimes means that regardless of the emotion that has been, invoked or pulled out of you, that shouldn't dictate my actions, right? So, any parent that might be listening, if you have kids, that sometimes they can elicit some strong emotions within you and your pride will want to rise up. But even when we're dealing with our kids, we have to, show humility and grace, because that's what they deserve, is grace from us. And so, I've told my kids, if I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong. I would prefer that they come to me the right way, in a way that I can receive it. But at the end of the day, even if they don't, I still have the responsibility to receive them telling me that I'm wrong. So if I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong. And then I have the responsibility of humility over pride, and being able to stomach, or suppress my pride, and having the humility to hear the message, even though I may not have liked how it was delivered. That's something that I have tried to work on over time, just in general, because it's very easy for the message to not be delivered in a way that we want it to be delivered, or for somebody to say, well, I didn't like the way you said that, and to discount what was said. And that can cause us to choose catastrophe over peace, because we're not, choosing humility over pride. And that's one thing Abraham did, though. But then that whole dialogue over division, we can really create division by not having dialogue. So where I've messed up in that in the past is that, sometimes as a parent and even as part of teams, it becomes a one-sided conversation and it's not a dialogue. And when that occurs, and I was married, unfortunately I'm divorced now, and I can just think of moments where there was no dialogue. And it created division, because when those things occur, there becomes a shutdown. And when there's no dialogue, there becomes a shutdown. When things become a lecture and it's supposed to be a conversation or a dialogue, it causes issues. And that's not what Abram created. He created a situation where there could be goal setting on both sides, right? He created a situation where Lot could be a part of the decision-making process, where Lot didn't have to feel like everything was decided for him. That's a problem that I've had in the past, and something that I've been working on. And before reading this, I never really thought about it this way. So when I was writing these notes, I was like, man, he had dialogue. He chose dialogue versus division, because when you're not willing to sit and talk through it and allow the other person's voice to be heard, you create a situation where it's going to be more of a divide than it needs to be, But again, he chose peace over catastrophe. And two ways so far that he did it was by choosing humility over pride and dialogue over division. The last thing that I feel that he did was choosing generosity over greed. And this goes to the first point where I talked about humility over pride. Abraham has seniority over Lot, but he still gave Lot the first choice of land. If you take the left hand, I'll take the right. If you take the right hand, I'll go left. He didn't have to do that. He didn't. He did not have to do that. And, that's something that I try to actually practice in my life is generosity over greed. That was actually kind of important to me. I understand how God has blessed me, and I'm not a person who looks for opportunities to get what's due to me. I look for opportunities to be a blessing, not for personal gain, not so that people can look up to me, not so people can give me credit. But I just believe that God has blessed me so that I can bless other people. People often say stuff like, God knows your heart. Well, God does know your heart. And, one passage that, and I'm going to just go to this really quickly, that all year, depending on when you look at this is 2025. All year I've kind of been focusing on Luke 6 as something to kind of help keep me grounded and focusing on some of the right things in terms of my heart posture, So as a part of this whole generosity thing, right, and doing things for the right reasons, I consider Luke 6. Luke 6 and 43. For no good tree bears bad fruit, nor, again, does a bad tree bear good fruit. For each tree is known by its own fruit. For figs are not gathered by thorn bushes, nor are grapes picked from a bramble bush. And this is the reason why I'm mentioning this. The good person out of the good treasure of his heart produces good, and the evil person out of his evil treasure produces evil. For out of the abundance of the heart, his mouth speaks. So I was mentioning that because I wanted to read that because that's my focus, is to continue to try to read my word and to continue to try to learn the principles that exist within the word and to continue to try to apply those principles to my life, because that's filling me up with good. Continuing to commune with God, continuing to commune with God's people, to continue to stay in the word, that's filling me up with good treasure, because out of good comes good. Out of evil comes evil. And the moments of my life where I've done things that I shouldn't do, or to other people, or how I respond to other people, it's often the moments where I'm not, I look at it in terms of an empty cup. I'm looking at this bottle here that I have in my hand. If this bottle was filled with dirty water, all I can pour out is dirty water. But if it's filled with clean water, I can pour out clean water. So I just look at my heart like that. So what am I putting into my heart? Am I filling it up with good things? The word, being around people. It doesn't mean I'm not going to be around people that can't help me grow, because it's not just about growth. It's also about what I can do for other people as well, in terms of my assignments and just being an example and just letting my light shine in dark places, things like that as well. But that's important to me, to continue to allow God to pour into me the good things so that good can come out. So my heart posture is very important to me. But that generosity over greed is a very important thing to me. So very important. My heart's desire is to please God and not to worry so much about how other people see what I'm doing. I'm motivated by pleasing God. But again, when conflict arises, choose peace over catastrophe. And in 3 ways where it looked like Moses did that. Abram did that. He chose humility over pride, dialogue over division, and generosity over greed. Now, the second thing that I saw here, let me flip pages for my notes. Same principle, but from Lot's perspective. When conflict arises, choose peace over catastrophe. But I'm going to add like a little sub-principle to that. Accept peace when parting, so help can find you when you need it. I'm going to say that again. Accept peace when parting, so help can find you when you need it. So conflict arose. Lot was involved in that conflict. Abram did some things. Lot didn't have to be accepting of anything that Abram brought up, but he accepted it. He went along with it. He accepted peace. Sometimes we can find ourselves in situations that are contentious, where there is conflict, and we have a decision to make. If somebody is trying to make peace, we can decide whether or not we want peace to be made, whether or not we want to accept that peace, right? Sometimes you have peacemakers, and they're trying, and we just don't want to accept peace. And that's what Lot did. Lot decided to accept peace. But not only that, Lot decided not to burn bridges. Lot made sure that his relationship remained intact, just as much as Abram made sure that his relationship remained intact, right? So when Lot was taken, can you imagine if Lot didn't accept peace and then Lot was taken and then word got back to Abram? Abram may have still went and rescued him. But the way you treat people, it just may have a way of coming back on you. There is this thing, as you would have others to do unto you, also do likewise unto them. I think that's in Luke as well. But, he was rescued by Abram. 160, 180 miles is how far they pursued him. By now I should have shown the map. And he brought back his kinsman Lot with his possessions and the women and all the people that were taken. If peace wasn't, when conflict arose, they chose peace over catastrophe. Not just Abram, but also Lot. Not just Abram, but also Lot. We could look at the situation and we can say that Lot chose the best environment. Lot lifted his eyes, verse 10 in chapter 13. Lot lifted up his eyes and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt in the direction of Zoar. And then the writer wrote, this was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So we know he lived near an area where there were some bad things that were happening, because it also said in verse 13, now the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. Lot likely didn't know those things at the time, right? But it's also possible. So I submit to you this thought. This is purely conjecture. I don't know. The Bible didn't say it. But it's possible that Lot, as a part of him accepting peace and also making peace and choosing peace, he chose to go in that direction. I don't know if it was left or right, but he could have chose to go in that direction as well as an act of peace, because God promised Abram and his offspring Canaan, that was their land. Lot didn't pick Canaan. Lot chose the Jordan Valley for himself. It didn't say he chose the Jordan Valley because he knew that this is what God had promised. So let me not stand in the way of that and cause an issue. No, it didn't. It didn't say that. But this is just me and my imagination thinking that it's possible that Lot was choosing peace as well and had that on his mind also. I try not to burn any bridges. If there are situations that come up and there are conflicts, my goal is to always choose peace over catastrophe. I never really thought about it in this way, but just when I read this, that was the principle that I felt like God gave me. And then I just kind of looked at it from both people's perspective, because it's easy to look at Abram. Like, I know what happened with Lot. I know where he was living. I know that he had to be pulled out of Sodom. I know all of that. But still, just at this particular moment, he chose peace as well. I don't see that it was just Abram who was the peacekeeper. I see Lot playing a role in that as well. But I really like that part about Abram, though, the humility over pride. That's a huge one right there. Like, I'm just thinking about myself back, it's just so many ways that like choosing peace can be related to humility versus pride. As a parent, like I mentioned, it can be really hard as a parent sometimes when you know what the right thing is and you just want to show your kids what the right thing is, and they're just being kids. They're just being teens. They're just being young adults. Or even if, you're at work and you know what the right thing is, and you have this boss and they're not wanting to listen, or you have this client and they're not wanting to listen. And, it's so hard to swallow your pride sometimes and to just, choose peace over catastrophe or over chaos. That's a difficult one, but I believe it's something that, we're called to do. Let there be no strife between you and me. That's what he said to Lot. Now, I know he said it to Lot because, we're kinsmen, but I think we should live at peace with everybody. There's no reason that we need to struggle really with anybody if we don't have to. But that is a tough one. I'm just thinking about, that's a tough one. Humility over pride. It's even a tough one. Dialogue over division. That's a tough one too. Sometimes when your mind is made up about things and you want things to happen a certain way, it's hard when you come into a room and the decision is made, but there should have been other people involved in making the decision, backing off that decision and allowing dialogue to take place. Because when you don't, you could create division, right? Signs of a good leader sometimes is not just making every decision in isolation, but sometimes allowing the group to influence decisions, not just from a psychological standpoint and making them think that they were a part of the decision, but truly letting them be a part of the decision. Every decision doesn't require the same level of input, right? Some decisions can be made by committee. Some decisions cannot be made by committee. Some decisions can be put to a vote. Some decisions need to be just one person needs to think about it and make a decision. There's a lot of different ways that it can happen, but just trying to figure out, a good balance of which one and when is a part of it all. Yeah, I think it's just a part of it all. But dialogue over division, you see so much struggling going on in the world, and people don't want to listen to each other. People just want to argue, and this side doesn't want to. You see it in politics all the time, There's no dialogue. It's just nothing but division. People are just talking at each other and not talking to each other. And I know I've been guilty of things like that. Yeah, I know I've been guilty of it. It's something that I'm working on as well. One of the things I'm working on as it relates to this principle, I never thought about it in this way, though, just being honest, is just the idea of, I've often, people have sometimes told me in the past in conversation that you're not listening to understand. You're just really waiting to respond. And so that's one thing that I've been trying to consciously focus on, is to be able to absorb what people are saying to me, to understand what's being said to me, not with the expressed intent of responding to what they're saying, but to be able to truly understand their perspective rather than just hearing what they say And it's not about rebutting what they say, but just not just hearing it and immediately responding. And because it's not how I've been, it's difficult to kind of change your normal mode of operation. So that's something that I've been focusing on. So just the thought of this, and I guess that's why these were why this was like the principle and kind of like how God laid it out in my mind, because this is what I need to do. This is why these came for me. So I'll just say it again and not belabor the point. Those churchy words, belabor the point. When conflict arises, choose peace over catastrophe, because things could have been very different for this group right here. But ways to choose peace over catastrophe is to choose humility over pride. And the example from the text there was that he could have asserted, his standing, his positioning, his entitlement, but he approached Lot like a peer, not as a subordinate. Second, choose dialogue over division. He didn't ignore what was going on. He didn't try to force anything. He talked about it. He allowed a lot of choice, and that's what ultimately allowed the conflict to be resolved. And then finally, choose generosity over greed. Related to that first part, humility over pride. He was entitled to be able to make the decision first. He was entitled to try to ask for more, but he didn't. He allowed Lot to choose. He allowed Lot to be first. And then on the flip side of that, looking at it from Lot's perspective, same principle, but then a sub-principle to that: accept peace when parting, so help can find you when you need it. Sometimes just maintaining those relationships, keeping peace and maintaining relationships, it's important, because you never know. You just never know. I remember hearing somebody, I'll say this final thing. I remember, I'm trying to think where it was at. Let me think. Oh, man, I'm going to have to look it up online really fast because I can't remember the story about, there was a woman that had, is it Elijah? I think it was Elijah. I don't remember I don't know what to search for. Yes. Okay. It was Elijah. This may relate, this may not relate, but this is what's in my mind about it. So I'm going to just share it. May relate, may not, but I'm going to share it. And then we'll stop right there. Because when Lot needed Abram, he was there. So for whatever reason, it just made me think of this story in 1 Kings 17. Not the same situation, so I'm not saying it for that reason, but cause and effect is really the reason that I'm saying it. Because when you look at this story, there's a level of causation where this act of peace occurring, one effect that was down the line was when Lot was in trouble, Abram was able to come to his rescue or come to aid him. And it could have been a direct result of the fact that when conflict arose, that they chose peace over catastrophe. So I think that's why this situation came to mind. So 1 Kings 17, starting with verse 8. Then the word of the Lord came to him, arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and dwell there. Behold, I have commanded a widow there to feed you. So he arose and went to Zarephath. And when he came to the gate of the city, behold, a widow was there gathering sticks. And he called to her and said, bring me a little water in a vessel that I may drink. And as she was going to bring it, he called to her and said, bring me a morsel of bread in your hand. And she said, as the Lord your God lives, I have nothing baked and only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. And now I'm gathering a couple of sticks that I may go in and prepare it for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die. And Elijah said to her, do not fear and do as you have said, but first make me a little cake of it and bring it to me, and afterward make something for yourself and your son. For thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, the jar of flour shall not be spent, and the jug of oil shall not be empty until the day that the Lord sends rain upon the earth. And she went and did as Elijah said, and she and he and her household ate for many days. The jar of flour was not spent, neither did the jug of oil become empty, according to the word of the Lord that he spoke by Elijah. Verse 17. After this, the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, became ill, and his illness was so severe that there was no breath left in him. And she said to Elijah, "What have you against me, O man of God? You have come to me to bring my sin to remembrance and to cause the death of my son." And he said to her, "Give me your son." And he took him from her arms and carried him into the upper chamber, where he lodged and laid him on his bed. And he cried to the Lord, "O Lord my God, have you brought calamity even upon the widow with whom I sojourn by killing her son?" Then he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and cried to the Lord, "O Lord, my God, let this child's life come into him again." And the Lord listened to the voice of Elijah, and the life of the child came into him again, and he revived. And Elijah took the child and brought him down from the upper chamber into the house and delivered him to his mother. And Elijah said, "See, your son lives." And the woman said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is truth." So I mention that because, again, cause and effect. Lot was a part of that peacemaking process as well. And as a result of that peacemaking process, I believe that it was beneficial when it came time when that one who escaped in verse 13 of chapter 14, then the one who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew, who was living by the oaks of Mamre the Amorite, the brother of Escalon of Aner. These were the allies of Abram. When Abram heard that his kinsmen had been taken captive, he led forth his trained men, born in his house 318 of them, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. Skipping to verse 16, then he brought back all the possessions and also brought back his kinsman Lot with his possessions and the women and the people. So considering the other story, not necessarily from a peace standpoint, but just thinking about the cause and effect. Here it was, she was asked by a prophet of God to do something. And had she not done it, it would have been, in a way, a bridge being burned. Lot didn't burn a bridge. So when Lot needed Abram, he came to his rescue. This woman didn't burn a bridge. So when she needed this man of God, he was there. Because had she said no, he may have left. It doesn't mean God wouldn't have saved her son. I won't say that. That's not what I'm saying at all. But what I'm saying is she didn't burn a bridge either. She baked that cake. They ate on it many days, and her son died. And Elijah was still there. And when her son died, Elijah cried out to God, and her son was revived. He was there and he was available to save her son. Sometimes being in right relationship and not burning bridges can have a positive impact on your situation. That was the point and why I read that story. And this is a similar situation with what happened with Lot. Lot also chose peace over catastrophe, and he accepted that peace when parting, so help could find him when he needed it. Okay, so that is it for today. As always, you may have gotten something different, and I love to hear about it. So I'm on assignment, and I share everything that I get here on Literal to Living. But if God has given you something and you are allowed to share, please do so in the comment section, and we can talk about it there. And if there's any comment that you have about anything that you've watched today, definitely please feel free to share, and I will respond. Again, my name is Alexi Johnson, and I want to thank you for watching today's chapter of Literal to Living. If this blessed you, consider subscribing so you'll be notified as new chapters drop, usually every Tuesday morning. If it's not quite for you, but you know someone else who may benefit, feel free to share it with them. Finally, it is my sincere prayer that these chapters not only help us to understand God's word, but to live it out. So I'll see you next time as we continue to go from literal to living. Thanks.